This will definitely be enough information for me to publish a video and find out whether or not the cardioid pattern on a 013 Soyuz FET is good or bad. We'll find out when I publish this video. The back end of the microphone is pointing at the speakers, which are in that direction. But in order to achieve that with a cardioid microphone, I have to boom over the top of my head, which I can do. I've got enough arm extension to boom it in that way if I chose to do so. We'll see how that rejection goes in terms of getting behind the mic, because behind the capsule of the mic is just anything behind this plane, but it's the lobe of sensitivity is coming down towards me, and there is no real lobe of sensitivity to concern myself with. It's just presumably everything beyond the 90-degree point is about 60 dB down, and then as you get around to the back of the microphone, anything in that direction is going to be vastly decreased because it's part of the negative lobe of sensitivity on the figure of 8 pattern that's used to make up a cardioid pattern. So to explain how a cardioid microphone works, you've essentially got two microphones if you want to look at it in the most simplistic terms. One is omnidirectional and the other is figure of 8. And in terms of phase cancellation, if you use the rear lobe, which is negative, and combine it with the positive lobe of the omnidirectional microphone, you get phase cancellation. Now, if you use 100% of the rear lobe of a figure of 8 design, you'll get the cardioid pattern, which is like the bum coming in on itself. Well, that's the combination of the rear lobe of negative sensitivity from a figure of 8 microphone combined with the total positive sensitivity, if you want to look at it in that way, from an omnidirectional capsule. So it's basically the combination of the two that gives you your standard cardioid pattern. And the more you bias it towards figure of 8, the more you step into the realms of super or hypercardioid, and the more you go the other direction into the positive lobe of sensitivity of the figure of 8 configuration, you go more into the direction of subcardioid, which I've already tried with the finger microphone, which I have a comparison to. This is a subcardioid by Violet Designs. Above my head when bam, I can't see, something's all over me. Called the finger microphone. So it's going the other direction towards positive reinforcement on the positive lobe of sensitivity on a figure of 8 microphone used in combination with an omni, which is where you typically get your cardioid patterns, and is the reason you can switch. So switching between how much of the figure of 8 pattern versus how much of the omni pattern is used is where you get your switch on your mic. So on the circuit board, it's just flicking between levels of that combination of the two. So obviously at one end of the extreme, you've just got the one mic, which would be a figure of 8, or at the other end of the extreme, you've just got the other mic, which is the omnidirectional mic. And then as you step through from omni, you've got subcardioid, cardioid, supercardioid, hypercardioid, and then figure of 8. And those are the steps in between. Now, I've seen some microphones, I think there's a Lewitt that even has sub-divisions between all of those. And it's just, well, how far do you want to split up the divide between figure of 8, which, if you're unaware, has got a lobe of sensitivity between the mic, and it's just because the plate's moving in and out. It seems really obvious when you think about it, but obviously if you're talking to that side of the mic, the plate's going that way, then that way. And if someone else is on the other side of it, they make the mic go that way, then that way. So one is a positive lobe of sensitivity and the other is a negative lobe of sensitivity. And that combination, like I say, with an omnidirectional will give you what gives you your cardioid pattern and your noise rejection. So for the purpose of this, I wouldn't normally concern myself too much using a shotgun mic, which I think is a supercardioid. You just think of the low bar pattern that the interference tube creates. Very, very directional microphones. You don't necessarily think of it in terms of the capsule and how the combination of omni and figure of 8 is going to affect the cancellation when you've got a nice shotgun mic. It just does cancel because of the interference tube. They're using that sort of more focus end of the scale in terms of how the capsule design works. Now, once you get rid of the interference tube, you're only relying on the directionality of the polar pattern and how much you can squeeze that front lobe of sensitivity down as much as possible to the figure 8 end of the scale, where in a figure of 8 mic, if you're talking to the side of a figure of 8 mic, where the plate would be going backwards and forwards, if you talk to the side of it, it's not doing anything. So you get perfect cancellation, and any sound that goes round one side of the plate or the other side is also self-cancelling. So in terms of noise rejection, on a figure of 8 microphone, it's essentially perfect. When you get round to the side of a figure of 8, you hear nothing. It's great. Well, you're trying to exploit that to the most degree in terms of cancellation on a standard microphone when you try and hook up and use that phase of the rear lobe to get that cancellation. Because obviously, if you're just using a figure of 8, having cancellation at the sides is nice and all, but not that useful. Whereas forcing it into that cardioid sort of bum or heart-shaped pattern where there is very, very good rear rejection, you know, by combining the positive phase of the input to the back of the mic with the, if you want to look at it this way, negative phase of the omni, or vice versa, to cancel itself out so that the back isn't actually developing any noise in terms of signal down the wire. You've just got a perfectly cancelling out negative versus positive polarity, and when you combine the two, it disappears, the signal vanishes, hence rear rejection of sound. Now, for me, and here, I'm off to one side of the room. So to have rear rejection, when I'm pointing the mic off the axis of the thing that I want to reject, which is my monitors, right? So I'm monitoring everything coming in through the speakers, and to give me the ability to have long shows, I need to be able to get up, walk around, do other domestic tasks, and still have the monitors running, and accidentally leave my mic open potentially and have it not feed back. All those sorts of things I have to consider. Now, for that reason, I think Cardioid's not going to cut it. I need that extra narrow front sensitivity with rejection that way. That way's my window, that way's my monitors. And based on what I think should work, this should be potentially nicer sounding, maybe. We'll find out if the Cardioid does actually sound nicer. Potentially it's got more bass to it, so it should sound warmer, maybe. You get more of the proximity effect. You've got cancellation in bass frequencies, which are longer wavelengths, that can be mitigated by getting closer to the mic. Now, the only reason you have a proximity effect is because you've got a figure of 8 design interacting with an omni design. And when you do that, you're then utilising the back and the front of the plate of the microphone. So that's going to affect how much bass the mic can pick up in terms of its frequency response, because you're mitigating for your own bass by it being picked up on the back end of the microphone plate that you're using to sense the sound. So if you get closer to a microphone, what you're actually doing is shortening that distance, which means that you're overcoming that limitation of the combination of both omni and figure of 8 patterns by shortening the distance. So you're overcoming a longer wavelength, a longer bass wavelength, the limitation of the back and the front of the plate seeing the signal at the same time. So that's what actually creates the proximity effect, or bass rise, whatever you want to call it. Whenever you get closer to a mic, your voice will more realistically replicate those deeper frequencies, and those deeper frequencies that you're producing from your chest cavity or whatever in proximity closer to the mic, but in reality it's nothing to do with proximity. It's only because of phase cancellation on the back of the microphone and the shortening of the distance, which I suppose is proximity, that cancels out that reduction in bass. So you're reintroducing bass that you already have to a microphone that's tailing off, that's essentially got a high pass filter on it, by the way the back and the front of the diaphragm interact with the sound. How fascinating. This will definitely be enough information for me to publish a video and find out whether or not the Cardioid pattern on a 013 Soyuz FET is good or bad. We'll find out when I publish this video.